The first crack appeared in the skylight at exactly 2:47 a.m., just as Maya Chen was highlighting a passage about cellular mitosis in her worn biology textbook. The sound was soft, almost musical, like ice beginning to fracture on a winter pond. She looked up from her corner table in the university's Whitmore Memorial Library, her dark eyes scanning the ornate glass dome 4 stories above. Moonlight filtered through the intricate Victorian ironwork, casting geometric shadows across the mahogany reading tables where she sat alone. If you're enjoying this thrilling story and want to see what happens next, this type of content takes considerable time and effort to create. Please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. The library's night security guard, Harold Winters, had long since stopped questioning her presence during his rounds. At 62, with kind gray eyes and a gentle Baltimore accent, Harold understood the sanctuary that books provided. He'd often pause at her table, sharing stories of his own late-night studying days 40 years ago when he'd been working toward his teaching degree. "You remind me of my daughter," he'd told Maya just last week, adjusting his worn leather duty belt. She had that same determination. Never knew when to quit studying. His voice had carried a note of pride mixed with something else, a sadness. Maya hadn't quite understood then. The library itself was a monument to academic devotion, built in 1897 with funds from the Whitmore family after their son died in a railway accident while returning from Harvard. The soaring ceilings, hand-carved reading alcoves, and that magnificent central skylight were designed to inspire scholarly pursuit. During the day, sunlight would cascade through the dome's colored glass panels, painting rainbow patterns across the reading tables. But at night, the space transformed into something more intimate, more personal. The deep shadows between the towering bookshelves created dozens of private worlds where students could lose themselves in study. She was 3 months away from her MCAT exam, 3 months from potentially changing her entire life trajectory. The second crack in the skylight was louder, more insistent. Maya set down her highlighter and really looked this time. The sound had been wrong, not the natural expansion and contraction of old glass responding to temperature changes, but something deliberate, purposeful. Her grandmother, who had survived the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, had taught Maya to trust her instincts about danger. "Listen with more than your ears, Apo," she would say in Tagalog, touching Maya's chest above her heart. "Your body knows truth before your mind accepts it." Harold emerged from the east wing stacks, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. At this hour, he usually walked the perimeter checking doors and windows, but tonight something had drawn him back to the central reading room earlier than usual. His weathered face carried the same expression Maya had seen on her father's face during neighborhood tensions, alert, but trying not to alarm. "Everything all right up there, Maya?" Harold called softly, following her gaze toward the skylight. His voice echoed slightly in the vast space, bouncing off the walls lined with 40,000 books. "I heard something," Maya said, closing her textbook but keeping her finger between the pages. "Like glass cracking." Harold's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He'd been working security for 12 years, had seen everything from student pranks to actual break-in attempts. But something about tonight felt different. Earlier, during his 10 p.m. rounds, he'd noticed a van parked across the street that hadn't been there the previous night. Nothing suspicious about it, necessarily university. Neighborhoods attracted all kinds of service vehicles, but it had tinted windows and no company. Markings, probably just the old building settling, he said. But his hand moved instinctively to his radio. "These October nights get cold fast. Temperature changes can play tricks with the old glass." Maya nodded, but she didn't reopen her book. Instead, she found herself studying Harold's face, noting the slight tension around his eyes. Her psychology classes had taught her to read micro-expressions, and Harold's face was telling her to be concerned. The third sound wasn't a crack at all. It was metal, scraping against metal, faint but rhythmic. like tools being adjusted or equipment being positioned. Maya's stomach tightened. She thought of her roommate Stephanie, asleep back in their shared apartment, probably dreaming about her art history thesis on Renaissance portraiture. She thought of her parents, who had sacrificed so much to send her to college, working double shifts at their restaurant to cover what financial aid couldn't. She thought of the acceptance letter to medical school that might never come if she couldn't focus on her studies. "Harold," Maya said quietly, "I think we should call campus police." But Harold was already moving, his radio in hand. "Base, this is Harold at Whitmore Memorial. I need a wellness check on the library exterior. Possible suspicious activity on the roof." Static filled the silence for a moment, before a tired voice responded. "Copy, Harold. Unit 23 is about 15 minutes out. Everything's secure inside." Harold looked at Maya, then up at the skylight where another hairline crack had appeared, this one running perpendicular to the first. "Unclear, Base. I'm going to do a full building sweep. I have one student inside who I'd recommend evacuating as a precaution." Maya was already packing her books, her movements quick and efficient despite her racing heart. The biology textbook went into her backpack first, followed by her notebooks and the precious thermos that had belonged to her mother. As she zipped her backpack, she caught sight of her reflection in the dark library windows, a young woman with determined eyes and her father's stubborn chin, preparing to flee from the place that had become her second home. "Wait," Harold said, holding up his hand. "Listen." They both froze. The library held its breath around them, 40,000 books bearing witness to their sudden alertness. And then Maya heard it, not from above this time, but from somewhere in the building's mechanical systems. The subtle change in air pressure that meant a door or window had been opened. The almost inaudible whisper of ventilation systems adjusting to new airflow patterns. Harold's radio crackled again. "Unit 23 to base. We're showing all exterior doors secure. No signs of forced entry. But there's definitely someone on the roof. We can see equipment up there." "Equipment?" Harold pressed the radio button. "What kind of equipment?" The pause stretched too long. When the officer's voice returned, it carried a new urgency. "Harold, you need to evacuate that building now. We're seeing what looks like tactical gear. Ropes, anchoring systems. This isn't a prank." Maya's blood turned to ice water. She thought of all the late nights she'd spent in this sanctuary, all the hours of peaceful study, all the dreams she'd built while surrounded by the wisdom of generations. The library had been her refuge from the chaos of college social life, her escape from the pressure of pre-med competition, her quiet space to think and grow and become who she was meant to be. Harold was already at her side, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder. "Come on, Maya, we're leaving. Now." They moved quickly toward the main entrance, their footsteps echoing off the hardwood floors. Maya clutched her backpack against her chest, her mother's thermos clinking softly against her textbooks with each step. Behind them, the magnificent library seemed to watch their retreat with benevolent concern, its carved figures and painted ceiling murals bearing witness to this unprecedented violation of academic peace. As they reached the heavy oak doors, Harold paused to look back one more time. He'd worked in this building for 12 years, had seen thousands of students find solace and knowledge within these walls. The library wasn't just his workplace, it was his calling, his contribution to something larger than himself. 37 years I've been around this university," he said quietly, more to himself than to Maya. "Never seen anything like this." Maya followed his gaze back toward table 847, where her reading lamp still cast its warm circle of light on the empty chair. Her highlighter lay beside an open textbook, marking her place in the chapter on cellular division, the process by which life renews and perpetuates itself. "Harold," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what do you think they want?" But before Harold could answer, the skylight finally gave way. 4 stories above them, reinforced Victorian glass that had withstood over a century of weather, vandalism, and simple age surrendered to whatever forces were working against it from above. The sound was tremendous, not just breaking glass, but the groan of metal framework being compromised, the whistle of ropes sliding through anchor points, and underneath it all, the purposeful movements of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Harold pushed Maya behind the circulation desk as glass fragments rained down into the central reading room. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice carrying 40 years of authority from his teaching days. But even as he said it, he was looking up in fascination and horror at the sight unfolding above them. Through the shattered skylight came 3 figures dressed in tactical gear, rappelling with military precision into the heart of the library. Their equipment was professional-grade matte black ropes, specialized harnesses, and gear that suggested extensive training. But it was their faces that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. These weren't random vandals or even sophisticated thieves. These were United States Marines, and they were looking directly at her. Maya had never imagined that her life would be defined by the sound of shattering glass. As she crouched behind the circulation desk, her mind raced not toward panic, but toward questions, the same analytical approach that had made her a successful pre-med student. Why Marines? Why the library? Why tonight, when she'd been reviewing cellular mitosis for what felt like the 100th time this semester? Her daily routine had been as predictable as the sunrise for 3 years. Wake at 6 a.m. in the small apartment she shared with Stephanie, brewing coffee in the French press her aunt had sent from Seattle. Shower while Stephanie slept her roommate's art history. Schedule didn't demand the brutal early starts of pre-med coursework. By 7:30, Maya was in the dining hall, eating oatmeal with blueberries while reviewing flashcards. Her mother had taught her that breakfast was sacred, never to be rushed or skipped, no matter how demanding the schedule. Classes filled her mornings and early afternoons organic chemistry with Professor Martinez, who had a gift for making complex molecular interactions seem like elegant dances. Physics with Dr. Sarah Kim, whose Korean accent reminded Maya of her grandmother's neighbor in Los Angeles. And biology with Professor Jackson, whose passion for cellular structures was infectious. Maya always sat in the front row, notebook open, asking questions that demonstrated she'd done the reading and then some. It was her afternoons that revealed who Maya truly was beneath the academic achievement. 3 days a week, she volunteered at the campus health center, helping international students navigate the American healthcare system. Her fluency in Tagalog, Spanish, and conversational Mandarin made her invaluable when frightened 19-year-olds needed someone who understood the unique terror of being sick far from home. She remembered Carlos, a freshman from Guatemala, who had been too embarrassed to explain his symptoms to the doctor. Maya had spent 2 hours with him, translating not just his words, but his cultural context, until he felt safe enough to accept treatment for what turned out to be a simple but painful case of food poisoning. "You're going to be a good doctor," Harold had told her one evening when she'd arrived at the library later than usual, still emotionally drained from helping a Chinese exchange student understand her diagnosis of anxiety disorder. "You see people, not just problems." Maya's evening routine was equally structured. Dinner at 6 p.m. often, just a sandwich eaten while walking from the health center to the library. By 7 p.m., she was at table 847, her materials arranged with the precision her father used when organizing his restaurant's prep station. The old radiator's humming reminded her of the industrial dishwasher at Chen's garden, where she'd worked summers since age 16. Learning that dedication to craft, whether cooking or studying, required both patience and relentless attention to detail. Her mother called every evening at 9 p.m., the timing calculated to catch Maya during her planned study break. These conversations were conducted in a mixture of English and Tagalog, with her mother sharing neighborhood gossip, her father's latest attempts at fusion cuisine, and gentle inquiries about Maya's social life that she consistently deflected. "Apo, "You need more than books," her mother would say, using the Tagalog endearment for grandchild that had somehow transferred to Maya. "When I was your age in Manila, even during my nursing school, we still found time for dancing, for friends." But Maya's friends were her books, her volunteer work, and the quiet community of late-night library regulars. There was Jennifer, a graduate student in comparative literature who occupied the table by the poetry section, always surrounded by novels in at least 3 languages. There was Marcus, an engineering student who muttered calculations under his breath and survived on energy drinks and determination. And there was Professor Hendricks, an emeritus faculty member in philosophy, who came in every Tuesday and Thursday evening to work on what he claimed was either the most important or most meaningless book ever written about the nature of consciousness. Maya's social life consisted of brief conversations with these scholarly companions, Harold's fatherly check-ins, and the occasional coffee with Stephanie when their schedules aligned. She'd tried dating during her sophomore year, a few dinners with David, a pre-law student who spent more time talking about his LSAT scores than asking about her dreams, and several awkward encounters, arranged by well-meaning friends who insisted she needed to live a little before medical school consumed her entirely. But Maya had discovered early that her idea of living and most people's were fundamentally different. She found joy in the perfect crystalline structure of a salt molecule, excitement in understanding how synapses fired across neural pathways, and deep satisfaction in helping someone understand their own body's needs. Her dreams were vivid and specific: a residency in family medicine, perhaps specializing in community health, eventually opening a clinic that served immigrant communities who struggled to navigate American healthcare systems. The contradictions in her personality revealed themselves in quiet moments. She was confident enough to challenge professors when their explanations seemed incomplete, yet humble enough to spend hours with patients who needed someone to simply listen. She was disciplined enough to maintain a 3.9 GPA while working part-time, yet compassionate enough to sacrifice study time when a friend needed support. She was practical enough to choose a major that would provide financial security for her family, yet idealistic enough to believe she could change individual lives through medicine. Her greatest fear wasn't failing the MCAT or being rejected from medical school. It was the possibility that success might change her essential nature. She'd seen it happen to older pre-med students who became so focused on competition and achievement that they forgot why they'd wanted to heal people in the first place. Sometimes, during her late-night study sessions, Maya would catch herself memorizing without understanding, processing information like a computer rather than a human being who wanted to touch lives. This fear manifested in small rituals that kept her grounded. She still called her grandmother every Sunday morning, speaking only in Tagalog about topics unrelated to school, the weather, her grandmother's garden, memories of Maya's childhood visits to Los Angeles. She still volunteered at the health center, even when midterms made every hour precious. And she still brought her mother's thermos to the library every night, filled with jasmine tea that connected her to family traditions that had nothing to do with academic achievement. Thermos itself told the story of Maya's heritage and aspirations. Her mother had received it as a nursing school graduation gift in 1995, a symbol of professional achievement that bridged her past in the Philippines with her future in America. The cherry blossom design had faded over 28 years of daily use, but the functionality remained perfect, keeping tea warm during long shifts at the hospital where Maya's mother had worked until Maya was 10, then through years of restaurant work when her parents decided that owning their own business would provide better stability for their daughters' education. Maya's relationship with her parents was built on unspoken understanding and mutual sacrifice. They worked 70-hour weeks at Chen's garden, navigating the complex social dynamics of running a family restaurant while maintaining connections to their Filipino heritage and adapting to American business culture. Maya worked 20 hours a week during the school year, 30 during summers, learning every aspect of restaurant operations while maintaining her academic focus. They rarely discussed money directly, but Maya understood that her education represented the fulfillment of dreams her parents had carried across oceans and through decades of 12-hour workdays. Her father's pride in her achievements was expressed through action rather than words. He would arrive at the restaurant early on days before Maya's major exams, preparing her favorite meals to be delivered to her apartment by one of the younger employees. Her mother's support was more verbal, but no less profound. Phone calls filled with encouragement, care packages containing everything from vitamins to handwritten notes reminding Maya to eat properly and sleep enough. The pressure Maya felt wasn't just academic, it was generational. She carried the hopes of parents who had left everything familiar to build new lives in a country where their professional qualifications weren't recognized, where their accents marked them as perpetual outsiders despite their intelligence and work ethic. She carried the dreams of grandparents who had survived war, colonization, and economic upheaval with the belief that education could provide security that political systems couldn't guarantee. But Maya also carried her own dreams, separate from family expectations. She wanted to understand how healing worked, not just physically but emotionally. How the simple act of being seen and heard could sometimes matter more than medication or procedures. She wanted to bridge the gaps between cultures and healthcare settings, to be the doctor who understood that a patient's reluctance to discuss symptoms might stem from cultural taboos rather than lack of intelligence, that healing practices from other traditions might complement rather than compete with Western medicine. These dreams had been nurtured during her volunteer work at the health center. She remembered Maria, an elderly woman from El Salvador, who had been suffering from chronic pain but was afraid to take prescribed medication because traditional healers in her homeland had warned against mixing herbal remedies with chemical treatments. Maya had spent 3 afternoons researching drug interactions and consulting with both the prescribing physician and Maria's traditional healer, ultimately developing a treatment plan that honored both approaches while ensuring Maria's safety. That memory sustained Maya through the most challenging aspects of pre-med coursework. When organic chemistry seemed like an exercise in memorizing abstract formulas, she remembered that understanding molecular interactions could help her explain to patients why certain medications worked better with food, why some supplements could interfere with prescriptions, why the timing of doses mattered for effectiveness. When physics problems seemed irrelevant to medical practice, she remembered that understanding wave mechanics could help her interpret ultrasounds that might save lives. Maya's typical Thursday evening before it was interrupted by Marines rappelling through the library. Skylight had begun like hundreds of others. She'd finished her volunteer shift at the health center at 6:30, later than usual because she'd been helping translate for a Vietnamese student whose anxiety about a pregnancy test had been complicated by language barriers and cultural concerns about discussing reproductive health. The conversation had required not just linguistic translation, but cultural bridge building, helping the young woman understand her options while respecting her family's traditional values. She'd grabbed a turkey sandwich from the campus market, eating it while walking through the crisp October evening toward Whitmore Memorial Library. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves from the residential neighborhood surrounding campus, mixing with the ever-present aroma of coffee from the dozen shops that kept university life caffeinated. Students moved in small clusters across the quad, their conversations creating a gentle background hum of academic and social concerns. Maya had waved to several familiar faces, classmates from organic chemistry, a graduate student she'd helped with translation services, Professor Martinez heading home after office hours with his characteristic leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. These brief social interactions satisfied her need for human connection without deriving her from her evening routine. At table 847, she'd arranged her materials with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that environment shaped focus. Biology textbook in the center, notebook to the right, calculator and colored pens within easy reach. Her mother's thermos positioned where the warm metal could anchor her when complex concepts threatened to overwhelm. The ritual of preparation was almost as important as the studying itself, a transition from the external world's demands to the internal world of learning and growth. She'd been reviewing cellular mitosis, fascinated as always by the elegant complexity of biological processes. How did cells know when to divide? What signals triggered the precise choreography of chromosome separation? How did millions of cellular decisions coordinate to create life, growth, healing? These questions connected to her deepest motivations for pursuing medicine, the desire to understand how bodies healed themselves and how medical intervention could support those natural processes. Now, crouched behind the circulation desk with Marine scanning the library above her, Maya realized that all her careful preparation, all her structured routines, all her dreams of healing others, had led to this moment of complete unpredictability. The life she'd built through discipline and determination was about to change in ways she couldn't control or anticipate. The first Marine to touch the library floor moved with the fluid precision of someone who had performed similar insertions hundreds of times. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Martinez, though Maya couldn't know her name yet, unclipped her repelling gear and immediately began scanning the vast reading room with practiced eyes. Her equipment was standard tactical gear, night vision goggles pushed up on her forehead, communications headset, tactical vest, and weapons that Maya hoped remained holstered. "Building secure," Martinez spoke into her headset, her voice carrying the authoritative calm of military leadership. "Civilian located behind the circulation desk. Adult female appears unharmed." Harold, still crouched beside Maya, slowly raised his hands above the desk. His years as an inner-city teacher had taught him how to de-escalate confrontational situations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for armed military personnel in his library. "We're not resisting," he called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "The young lady is a student here." "I'm a library security." The second Marine, Corporal James Washington, landed with equal precision and immediately moved to establish a perimeter. His focus was on the library's multiple entrances and windows, ensuring no additional civilians could stumble into what was clearly a classified operation. Washington was younger than Martinez, perhaps 25, with the kind of hyper-alert awareness that suggested recent combat experience. The third Marine, Private First Class Maria Santos, was the youngest and most visibly tense. As she unclipped from her rope, Maya noticed that Santos kept glancing toward the library's stained glass windows, as if expecting additional threats. Her weapon remained ready but not aimed, following protocols for civilian contact that suggested extensive training in population interaction. Maya's mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Military operations on American college campuses were virtually unheard of outside of ROTC training exercises, and those certainly didn't involve breaking through skylights in the middle of the night. Her knowledge of current events was limited by her intense focus on pre-med studies, but she was certain that domestic military operations required extraordinary justification. "Ma'am," Staff Sergeant Martinez addressed Maya directly, "I need you to remain calm and answer a few questions. We're here on official business that doesn't concern you personally, but we need to verify some information." Maya slowly stood, her hands visible, her backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. "I'm just a student," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I study here every night. I don't know anything about whatever you're looking for." Martinez exchanged a glance with Washington, who had positioned himself near the library's main entrance. Some kind of silent communication passed between them, the wordless coordination of military personnel who had learned to trust each other's judgment in high-stakes situations. "What's your name, ma'am?" Martinez asked, pulling out a tablet device that looked more advanced than standard military issue. Maya Chen, she responded. Then added, I'm a junior, pre-med major. I volunteer at the campus health center. I don't understand why you're here. Martinez input Maya's name into her device, waited for what seemed like an eternity, then looked up with an expression Maya couldn't interpret. Miss Chen, we need you to come with us for questioning. This is not an arrest, but it is not optional. Harold stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding his caution. Now wait just a minute. This young woman has done nothing wrong. She's been studying in this library every night for 3 years. I can vouch for her character completely. Washington moved slightly, not threateningly, but enough to remind everyone that this was a military operation with established protocols. Sir, we appreciate your cooperation, but we need you to step back and allow us to handle the situation. According to our orders, Maya felt the first real surge of panic. The careful structure of her life classes, studying, volunteering, family obligations seemed to be dissolving around her. What questioning? What orders? I don't understand what's happening here. Private Santos finally spoke, her voice carrying a slight accent that sounded southwestern. Ma'am, we can't explain the details, but you're not in trouble. We just need to verify some information that may be connected to your identity. My identity? Maya's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. I'm nobody special. I'm just trying to get into medical school. I work at my parents' restaurant on weekends. I help international students at the health center. What could you possibly need to verify? Martinez was reading something on her tablet, her expression growing more serious. Miss Chen, do you know anyone named Dr. Elena Vasquez? The name hit Maya like ice water. Dr. Vasquez had been her supervisor at the health center for the past year, a physician who specialized in international student health services. She was brilliant, compassionate, and had become something of a mentor to Maya, encouraging her to consider specializing in community health after medical school. Yes, Maya said slowly. She's my supervisor at the campus health center. She's a doctor there. Why? What does this have to do with Dr. Vasquez? Martinez and Washington exchanged another look, this one carrying more urgency. Washington spoke into his headset. Base, civilian confirms association with subject Vasquez. Requesting immediate guidance on extraction protocols. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. These were details about his early childhood that he'd never questioned before, accepting his mother's explanations that her work had required travel to challenging locations. Hearing them presented as potential fabrications was clearly disturbing him. It was dangerous work, Mia acknowledged. But the pay was excellent, and I needed to establish financial security for Daniel's future. Single mothers sometimes have to take risks that other people might consider unwise. Indeed, Harrison said, making a note in his file. And you maintained your position with these companies even during your pregnancy and the first months of Daniel's life? The question was a trap, and Mia knew it. If she claimed to have continued working in Afghanistan while 7 months pregnant, it would be obviously false. If she admitted to taking extended leave, it would create gaps in her employment history that couldn't be explained by legitimate telecommunications work. I took some time off when Daniel was born, she said. But I maintained consulting relationships with several firms, working remotely when possible. Remote work, Harrison repeated. From Afghanistan and Pakistan. In 2006 and 2007, the years when internet and communication infrastructure in those regions had been primitive at best, when most remote work for American companies would have been impossible due to security concerns and technical limitations. Harrison was systematically demolishing her cover story with the methodical precision of someone who had considerable experience in interrogation techniques. Daniel was looking increasingly confused and concerned. "Mom," he said quietly, "is everything okay?" "It sounds like there might be some problems with your employment records." Before Mia could answer, Harrison leaned forward slightly and asked the question she'd been dreading. "Mrs. Miller, during your time overseas, did you ever work in any capacity for the United States government or any of its agencies?" The room went completely silent. Outside, the reception continued, but inside this sterile conference room, Mia could hear her own heartbeat and the sound of Daniel's slightly accelerated breathing. Harrison's question hung in the air like a live grenade with the pin already pulled. If she lied outright, she would be committing a federal crime in front of a witness. If she told the truth, she would be violating classification protocols that could result in prosecution under the Espionage Act. And if she remained silent, she would be confirming Harrison's suspicions while simultaneously destroying her relationship with Daniel. "I think," she said slowly, "that before I answer any more questions, I need to understand exactly what kind of information you're looking for and why it's necessary for my son's security clearance." Harrison closed the manila folder and leaned back in his chair. For the first time since they'd entered the room, his expression softened slightly, showing hints of what might have been sympathy or regret. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "I think we both know that this conversation stopped being about a routine background check some time ago." The silence in the conference room stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with tension that seemed to press against the walls. Daniel looked between his mother and Commander Harrison with growing alarm, his young face reflecting the dawning realization that whatever was happening went far beyond routine paperwork issues. "I don't understand," Daniel said, his voice carefully controlled but with an underlying tremor that broke Mia's heart. "What exactly are you suggesting about my mother's background?" Harrison's expression remained neutral, professional, but Mia could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was a career military officer who had spent decades navigating the complex intersection of national security and personal relationships. He knew exactly how devastating this conversation could be for both mother and son. "What I'm suggesting," Harrison said carefully, "is that the employment history your mother provided contains inconsistencies that raise legitimate security concerns. Before we can approve your clearance for the summer program, we need to resolve these discrepancies." Mia felt the familiar sensation of operational thinking taking over, the cold analytical mindset that had kept her alive through 15 years of intelligence work. She was being maneuvered into a corner, but she still had options, most of them terrible, all of them carrying consequences she'd hoped never to face. "Commander Harrison," she said, "I'd like to speak with you privately for a moment." "Mom." "No," Daniel interjected, his alarm now clearly visible. "Whatever questions he has, I want to hear the answers. This is about my future, my security clearance. I have a right to know what's going on." The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. For 18 years, Mia had protected Daniel from the truth about her past, building walls of carefully crafted lies that had allowed him to grow up believing his mother was exactly who she appeared to be. Now those walls were crumbling, and she could see the foundation of trust they'd built together beginning to crack. "Daniel," she said gently, "there are some things that require classification levels," he finished, his tone bitter. "There are always classification levels with you, aren't there, Mom? Always some reason why you can't give me a straight answer about your past." Harrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should adjourn this meeting and continue at a later time, when Mrs. Miller has had an opportunity to consult with appropriate legal counsel." Legal counsel. The suggestion sent a chill through Mia's body. Once lawyers became involved, the situation would escalate beyond her ability to control. Intelligence agencies had their own legal departments, their own ways of handling operatives whose covers had been compromised. Getting attorneys involved would mean acknowledging officially that there was something to hide, something that required protection under federal law. "That won't be necessary," Mia said. "Commander, I believe you mentioned that you served in Afghanistan during the same period when I was supposedly working there for telecommunications companies." Harrison nodded slowly. "Among other assignments, yes. then you would be familiar with the joint task forces that operated in that region. The cooperation between different branches of military intelligence and other government agencies. I would. Harrison confirmed, his voice becoming more cautious. Daniel was watching this exchange with increasing confusion and frustration. Will someone please explain what you're talking about? Joint task forces? Government agencies? Mom, what kind of work were you really doing overseas? Before Mia could respond, the conference room door opened and Sarah Chen stepped inside. She was no longer wearing her cadet uniform, but had changed into civilian clothes, dark jeans, a simple blue sweater, and an expression that was far more mature and serious than the friendly academy student Mia had met earlier. I apologize for the interruption, Sarah said, though her tone suggested she wasn't apologetic at all. But I thought Mrs. Miller might want to know that her former handler has been trying to reach her for the past 3 hours. The bottom dropped out of Mia's world. Sarah wasn't a cadet at all, or if she was also something far more significant. The casual mention of a handler confirmed Mia's worst fears about the scope of this operation. Her cover hadn't just been blown accidentally, it had been deliberately destroyed as part of a larger plan she didn't yet understand. Daniel stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. Handler? What the hell is a handler? Mom, what is she talking about? Sarah ignored Daniel's question and focused on Mia. Your phone's been off for hours. Standard operational security protocols suggest you should check in when there's been a compromise of your civilian identity. Mia felt everything she'd built over the past 15 years collapsing around her like a controlled demolition. The careful life she'd constructed, the normal relationship she'd tried to maintain with Daniel, the future she'd envisioned for both of them, all of it was crumbling because she'd made the mistake of thinking she could attend her son's graduation without consequences. I need to make a phone call, she said, standing and reaching for her purse. No, Daniel said sharply, moving to block her path to the door. Nobody's making any phone calls until someone explains what's happening. Mom, I've spent my entire life accepting your vague explanations about your work, your past, your reasons for moving us around when I was little. I'm 18 years old, I'm about to serve my country, and I deserve to know who my mother really is. The pain in his voice was devastating, but it was the disappointment that nearly broke her. Daniel had always looked at her with such trust, such uncomplicated love and admiration. She'd been his hero, the strong single mother who'd sacrificed everything for his future. Now she could see that image dying in his eyes, replaced by confusion and the terrible suspicion that everything he'd believed about his family was a lie. Your mother, Sarah Chen said with the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd been briefed on exactly how much to reveal, worked for the Central Intelligence Agency as a field operative specializing in human intelligence gathering and counter-terrorism operations in Southwest Asia. That everything he'd believed about his family was a lie. Your mother, the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd been much to reveal, worked for the Central Intelligence field operative special intelligence gathering and counter-terrorism operations in South. The cool October air hit Maya's face as they exited Whitmore Memorial Library. A black SUV with tinted windows idled near the main steps, its engine running and passenger door already open. She noticed 2 additional Marines positioned near the vehicle, their alert postures suggesting this was a larger operation than just the 3 who had entered through the Skylight. Campus was nearly deserted at this hour, but Maya spotted a few students walking between dormitories in the distance. Their normal college concerns, upcoming tests, social plans, part-time job schedules seemed impossibly distant from her current reality. She wondered if any of them would notice the military vehicles on campus, if rumors would spread by morning, if her disappearance would become part of campus mythology. As Maya approached the SUV, she caught sight of her reflection in its tinted window. The young woman looking back at her appeared smaller than she felt, more vulnerable than she'd imagined herself to be. Her dark hair was pulled back in the practical ponytail she wore for studying. Her clothing was the comfortable jeans and sweater she'd chosen for a quiet evening in the library. And her expression carried the bewildered look of someone whose life had just taken an incomprehensible turn. Staff Sergeant Martinez opened the vehicle's rear door. "Ms. Chen, please get in. We'll be driving for about 30 minutes to reach the facility where you'll be debriefed." Maya paused at the threshold, understanding that stepping into this vehicle meant crossing a line from which she might not be able to return unchanged. Everything she'd built, her reputation as a dedicated student, her relationships with professors and fellow volunteers, her carefully structured path toward medical school, could be altered or destroyed by whatever lay ahead. She thought of Dr. Vasquez, whose mentorship had shaped Maya's understanding of medicine as both science and compassion. If Dr. Vasquez was truly involved in something that warranted federal investigation, Maya needed to understand what had happened. But if this was all some terrible mistake, she needed to clear her name and return to her studies before too much damage was done to her future. "Can you at least tell me if Dr. Vasquez is safe?" Maya asked as she settled into the vehicle's leather seat. Martinez slid in beside her while Washington took the front passenger position and Santos joined the driver, another Marine Maya hadn't seen before. "Dr. Vasquez is currently in federal custody, undergoing questioning similar to what you'll experience. Her safety is ensured. Federal custody." The phrase sent another wave of unreality through Maya's consciousness. Dr. Vasquez, who had spent countless hours helping international students understand American medical systems, who had encouraged Maya to see medicine as a bridge between cultures, who had praised Maya's translation skills and cultural sensitivity. That same Dr. Vasquez was now in federal custody. The SUV pulled away from Whitmore Memorial Library, and Maya watched through the rear window as the building grew smaller. The damaged skylight was barely visible in the darkness, but she could imagine Harold inside, probably making phone calls to university administration, trying to ensure that proper procedures were followed even after the fact. As they drove through the residential neighborhoods surrounding campus, Maya noticed that their route was taking them away from the city center, toward the rural areas where university research facilities and government contractors maintained offices. The implications were unsettling. Whatever Secure Facility 7 might be, it was clearly designed to operate away from public scrutiny. "Can I ask what kind of questions you'll be asking me?" Maya said, trying to maintain some sense of agency in a situation where she felt completely powerless. Martinez consulted her tablet again. "The questions will focus on your work at the campus health center, your interactions with Dr. Vasquez, and your contact with international students who may have sought medical services there." International students. Maya's mind began connecting dots she hoped were coincidental. Her volunteer work involved helping international students navigate American healthcare, often serving as a translator and cultural bridge. Dr. Vasquez specialized in international student health services. If there was some kind of security concern involving foreign nationals who had accessed campus medical services, Maya's involvement would be documented in health center records. But what kind of security concern could justify military intervention? Maya's work involved helping homesick teenagers understand prescription instructions and anxious graduate students access mental health services. She couldn't imagine any connection between her volunteer activities and legitimate national security issues. The SUV turned onto a rural highway, its headlights cutting through darkness that seemed more complete than the gentle night lighting of campus. Maya realized that she was being taken further from everything familiar, deeper into a world governed by rules and priorities she didn't understand. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Stephanie. "Saw weird lights at library from dorm window. Everything okay?" Maya looked at Martinez, who nodded permission for her to respond. Maya typed back, "Had to leave library early. We'll explain tomorrow." She hoped that would be true. 20 minutes later, The SUV turned into what appeared to be an industrial complex, surrounded by high fencing and discreet but sophisticated security measures. The sign at the entrance read, Meridian Research Associates, a name that conveyed corporate legitimacy while revealing nothing about actual function. Secure Facility 7? Maya asked, officially. It's a government contractor facility that handles various research projects, Washington explained. Unofficially, it's where we conduct debriefings that require privacy and security. The building itself was modern but unremarkable, 2 stories of glass and steel that could have housed software development, medical research, or financial services. But the security measures surrounding it, multiple checkpoints, armed guards, sophisticated surveillance systems indicated purposes more sensitive than typical corporate activities. As the SUV stopped at the main security checkpoint, Maya realized that she was crossing another threshold. Campus had represented the known world of academic challenges and career preparation. This facility represented something entirely different, a world where individual rights might be secondary to national interests, where questions might be asked that she wasn't prepared to answer, where the simple act of helping international students could somehow be construed as suspicious. A security guard approached the vehicle, checked Martinez's credentials, and waved them through to an underground parking garage. The transition from outdoor night air to enclosed, artificially lit space felt symbolic. Maya was being moved from her familiar world into one completely controlled by others. Ms. Chen, Martinez said as the SUV parked, I want to emphasize again that you're here to help us understand a situation that may not involve you directly. Answer questions honestly. Don't volunteer information beyond what's asked. And remember that your cooperation will help us resolve this matter quickly. Maya nodded. But she was thinking about her parents, who would wake up in a few hours to begin another day of restaurant work, unaware that their daughter's life had taken this incomprehensible turn. She thought about her morning organic chemistry class, where her absent seat would be noticed by Professor Martinez, who had praised Maya's consistent attendance and academic engagement. She thought about the international students who might seek her translation help at the health center that afternoon, only to find that she wasn't available. Most of all, she thought about Dr. Vasquez, somewhere else in this same system, answering questions about work that had seemed dedicated entirely to helping others. If Dr. Vasquez was truly involved in something dangerous, Maya needed to understand how someone so committed to healing could have become entangled in national security concerns. If this was all a mistake, she needed to clear both their names and return to the medical career path that represented her family's sacrifices and her own dreams. As Maya followed the Marines through the parking garage toward an elevator that would take her deeper into this classified world, she clutched her backpack against her chest and silently promised herself that she would find a way to return to Table 847, to her textbooks, to her planned future as a healer. Whatever questions lay ahead, whatever accusations or suspicions had brought her here, she would answer them truthfully and completely, trusting that the truth would eventually restore her freedom. The elevator doors closed, sealing Maya away from the world she knew and delivering her into circumstances that would test everything she believed about justice, truth, and the price of helping others. The interview room at Secure Facility 7 was designed to be simultaneously comfortable and intimidating. Soft lighting, cushioned chairs, and a table with bottles of water suggested civilized conversation, while the absence of windows, the subtle hum of recording equipment, and the reinforced door indicated that leaving would require permission from others. Maya sat across from 2 federal agents, who had introduced themselves only as Agent Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, and Agent Michael Rodriguez. Both appeared to be in their early 40s, professionally dressed, and trained in the kind of neutral expression that revealed nothing while observing everything. Miss Chen, Agent Rodriguez began, opening a thick folder filled with documents Maya couldn't see. We appreciate your cooperation in this matter. Before we begin, I want to assure you that you're not under arrest and that you're free to request legal representation at any time. Maya nodded, though she understood that free to request didn't necessarily mean the request would be granted immediately. Can you tell me why I'm here? I still don't understand what this has to do with me. Agent Chen leaned forward slightly. Your volunteer work at the campus health center has brought you into contact with several international students who are now subjects of a federal investigation. We need to understand the nature of those interactions and determine whether you observed anything unusual during your work there. What kind of investigation? Maya asked, though she suspected the question would be deflected. We can't share operational details, Rodriguez confirmed. But I can tell you that it involves potential threats to national security that may have been facilitated through campus health services. Maya felt her stomach drop. The international students she'd worked with were homesick, teenagers and overwhelmed graduate students dealing with ordinary medical concerns. The idea that her translation work could be connected to national security threats seemed absurd. Yet she was sitting in a federal facility being questioned by agents who clearly took the matter seriously. I've helped dozens of international students over the past year, Maya said. Most of them just needed someone to explain medical procedures or translate symptoms they couldn't describe in English. I can't imagine any connection to security threats. Agent Chen consulted her own folder. We're going to show you photographs of specific individuals and ask about your interactions with them. Some of these conversations may seem routine to you, but they could contain information relevant to our investigation. The first photograph showed Ahmed Hassan, a graduate student in computer science from Egypt, whom Maya had helped 3 months earlier. He'd been suffering from severe headaches and anxiety, worried that the stress of his research program was causing serious health problems. Maya had translated for him during his appointment with Dr. Vasquez, helping him explain that his symptoms worsened when he worked late in the computer lab. I remember Ahmed, Maya said. He was having headaches and was worried about the pressure of his graduate program. Dr. Vasquez prescribed stress management techniques and suggested he reduce his late-night lab work. It seemed like typical graduate student stress. Rodriguez made a note. Did Ahmed mention his specific research focus or discuss any of his computer science work during the medical consultation? Maya tried to recall the conversation. He said he was working on some kind of network security project for his thesis, but he was mainly concerned about whether the headaches meant he had brain tumor or something serious. Dr. Vasquez explained that stress-related headaches are common among graduate students. Network security, Agent Chen repeated, exchanging a glance with Rodriguez. Did he mention any specific applications for his research? Government contracts, private sector partnerships, international collaborations? No, nothing like that. He was just scared about his health and needed someone to help him communicate with the doctor. Maya paused, realizing that this line of questioning suggested Ahmed's computer science work might be connected to whatever had triggered this investigation. The second photograph showed Fatima Al-Zahra, an undergraduate from Saudi Arabia who had sought help at the health center for what turned out to be a severe allergic reaction to a medication prescribed by an off-campus physician. Maya had spent 2 hours with Fatima, translating her symptoms and medical history, helping Dr. Vasquez understand that Fatima had been taking an herbal supplement that interacted dangerously with the prescribed medication. Fatima had an allergic reaction to medication, Maya explained. She'd been taking traditional remedies from home that interacted with something a doctor had prescribed. Dr. Vasquez had to coordinate with the emergency room to make sure she received proper treatment. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. What kind of traditional remedies? Did she bring any substances from Saudi Arabia that weren't declared through customs? Maya felt uncomfortable with the implications of the question. I don't know what she brought or how she brought it. I just know she mentioned taking herbal supplements that her grandmother had recommended. Dr. Vasquez was concerned about drug interactions, not customs violations. Did Fatima discuss her family in Saudi Arabia? Any mention of government connections, business interests, or reasons for sending her to study in the United States specifically? She talked about missing her family, like most international students do. I don't remember her mentioning anything about government or business connections. She was just a homesick 19-year-old who nearly had a dangerous allergic reaction. The questions continued for 2 hours, with agents showing Maya photographs of 16 different international students she'd helped over the past year. Each case had seemed routine at the time: translation services, cultural bridge building, helping nervous young people navigate American medical systems. But the agent's questions revealed connections and implications Maya had never considered. There was Viktor Petrov from Russia, whose anxiety about a routine physical exam had seemed like normal nervousness about medical procedures in a foreign country, but whose graduate research in materials science apparently involved dual-use technologies with potential military applications. There was Lin Wei from China, whose depression and homesickness had required sensitive counseling about mental health services, but whose undergraduate work in biochemistry had somehow caught federal attention. There was Carlos Mendez from Colombia, whose concerns about a minor skin condition had seemed trivial, but whose family connections apparently warranted scrutiny. As the questioning progressed, Maya began to understand that her volunteer work had inadvertently provided her with access to personal information about international students who were subjects of federal surveillance. Her role as a cultural translator and trusted confidant had made her a valuable source of intelligence about people who might pose security risks. "Miss Chen," Agent Chen said during a break in the questioning, "I want you to understand that none of these students are necessarily dangerous or guilty of any crimes. But when foreign nationals access American educational and research facilities, we have a responsibility to monitor potential security implications. Your work at the health center provided you with insights into their personal lives, health concerns, and emotional states that could be relevant to our assessments." Maya felt a surge of anger mixed with betrayal. "Are you saying that I was unknowingly spying on vulnerable students who trusted me to help them? These people came to the health center because they were sick or scared or homesick. They trusted me to translate for them and help them understand American medical systems." Agent Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "You weren't spying, Miss Chen. You were providing legitimate medical translation services. But information you gathered during those interactions may be relevant to legitimate security concerns about some of these individuals. What about Dr. Vasquez? Why is she in custody if we were just providing medical services?" The agents exchanged another look, and Maya sensed that this question approached the heart of whatever had triggered the federal investigation. Agent Chen opened another folder, this one containing documents that appeared to be medical records, financial statements, and communication logs. "Dr. Elena Vasquez has been under surveillance for 6 months based on intelligence, suggesting that she may have been passing information about international students to foreign intelligence services." Maya felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her chair. Dr. Vasquez, who had been her mentor and role model, who had encouraged her medical career aspirations, who had dedicated her life to helping international students, that same Dr. Vasquez was suspected of being a foreign intelligence operative. "That's impossible," Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Dr. Vasquez cares about her patients more than anyone I've ever known. She spends her own money buying medications for students who can't afford them. She works unpaid overtime counseling homesick kids who need someone to talk to. There's no way she would betray her patients' trust." Agent Rodriguez slid several documents across the table. "These are financial records showing payments to Dr. Vasquez from accounts traced to Colombian intelligence services. These are communication logs showing encrypted messages between Dr. Vasquez and contacts in Bogotá. And these are medical records that appear to have been accessed and copied without legitimate medical justification." Maya stared at the documents, trying to reconcile the evidence with her personal knowledge of Dr. Vasquez's character. The financial records showed deposits of several $1,000s over the past year. The communication logs revealed regular contact with individuals in Colombia whose identities were redacted, but whose intelligence affiliations were noted. The medical access logs showed that Dr. Vasquez had reviewed files for international students who had never been her direct patients. Even if these documents are real, Maya said slowly, there could be innocent explanations. Dr. Vasquez immigrated from Colombia 15 years ago. She probably has legitimate contacts there. And she reviews medical files for students throughout the health center system. As part of her supervisory responsibilities, Agent Chen nodded. You're right that individual pieces of evidence could have innocent explanations. But when we combine financial records, communication patterns, and unusual access to sensitive student information, a pattern emerges that suggests intelligence collection and transmission. Maya thought about her months of working closely with Dr. Vasquez, trying to identify any behavior that might have seemed suspicious in retrospect. Dr. Vasquez had always been interested in her patients' backgrounds, but that had seemed like natural medical curiosity and cultural sensitivity. She had asked detailed questions about students' family situations and home countries, but that had appeared to be part of providing comprehensive health care that considered cultural and social factors. Dr. Vasquez encouraged me to ask detailed questions about patients' backgrounds, Maya admitted reluctantly. She said understanding their cultural context was essential for providing effective medical care. But I thought that was just good medicine, not intelligence gathering. What kinds of questions did she encourage you to ask? Agent Rodriguez inquired. Maya tried to remember specific guidance Dr. Vasquez had provided during her training and supervision. She told me to ask about family occupations, because some cultures have different attitudes toward medical authority based on social class. She said to inquire about students' academic programs, because understanding their stress levels required knowing their educational pressures. She emphasized learning about their financial situations, because many international students face economic challenges that affect their health choices. As Maya spoke, she realized that the comprehensive patient profile she'd been trained to develop could indeed serve intelligence purposes as well as medical ones. Information about students' family backgrounds, academic research, financial resources, and emotional vulnerabilities would be valuable to foreign intelligence services seeking to identify potential recruitment targets or security risks. Ms. Chen, Agent Chen said gently, we believe that Dr. Vasquez recruited you as an unwitting intelligence asset. Your language skills, cultural sensitivity, and natural ability to build trust with international students made you an ideal source of information. She may have genuinely cared about providing good medical care while simultaneously using the information you gathered for intelligence purposes. The possibility that she had been manipulated felt almost worse than the possibility that she had been complicit. Maya had trusted Dr. Vasquez completely, had seen her as a role model for combining medical expertise with cultural compassion. The idea that her mentor had exploited both Maya's idealism and her patience' vulnerabilities challenged everything Maya believed about healing, trust, and professional ethics. What happens now? Maya asked. To Dr. Vasquez, to the students, to me? Agent Rodriguez closed his folders. Dr. Vasquez will face federal charges related to espionage and violation of medical privacy laws. The international students will be evaluated case by case to determine whether any pose legitimate security risks or were themselves victims of intelligence operations. As for you, that depends on your continued cooperation and our assessment of your knowledge and intent. Maya realized that her dream of medical school, her carefully planned career path, and her family's sacrifices could all be destroyed by circumstances she had never understood or intended. Even if she was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, the association with a federal espionage investigation might make her a security risk in the eyes of medical school admissions committees and future employers. "I want to help," Maya said finally. "I want to understand what really happened and make sure that any students who were genuinely victimized get the protection and support they deserve. But I also need to know that my future isn't being destroyed because I tried to help sick people communicate with their doctors." Agent Chen smiled for the first time during the interview. "Ms. Chen, your cooperation and obvious good intentions work in your favor. If you continue to assist our investigation and help us understand the full scope of Dr. Vasquez's activities, we'll do everything possible to minimize the impact on your academic and professional future." As Maya prepared to answer more questions about her year of unwitting involvement in a federal espionage case, she thought about the international students who had trusted her with their fears, their health concerns, and their homesickness. Whatever Dr. Vasquez's true motivations had been, those students deserved better than to have their medical consultations become tools in intelligence operations. Maya promised herself that she would find a way to protect those students while helping uncover the truth about her mentor's double life. The path to medical school might be more complicated now, but her commitment to healing and protecting vulnerable people had only grown stronger. 3 weeks after the night Marines descended to the library Skylight, Maya Chen walked across the campus quad carrying a different kind of weight than the textbooks in her backpack. The October air still carried the scent of burning leaves. Students still clustered around coffee shops discussing assignments and social plans. But Maya's perspective on the university community had fundamentally changed. Role as a federal witness had required her to testify before a grand jury investigating Dr. Elena Vasquez's espionage activities. The testimony process had been grueling hours of detailed questions about conversations she'd had months earlier, analysis of medical records she'd helped create, and examination of her own motivations and awareness during her volunteer work. But through it all, Maya had maintained her commitment to protecting the international students who had trusted her with their vulnerabilities. The grand jury had issued indictments against Dr. Vasquez on 7 counts of espionage, 4 counts of violating medical privacy laws, and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit acts against national security. The evidence revealed that over 18 months, Dr. Vasquez had systematically collected personal, academic, and family information about international students from countries of strategic interest to Colombian intelligence services. She had used Maya's translation services and cultural insights to develop comprehensive profiles that were transmitted to handlers in Bogotá through encrypted communications. But the investigation had also revealed something more complex than simple betrayal. Dr. Vasquez's family in Colombia was being threatened by narcotics traffickers who had discovered her brother's work as an informant for American drug enforcement agencies. The intelligence work she had been coerced into performing was meant to protect her family members from violence, though she had gradually become more deeply involved in the operation than survival alone demanded. Maya struggled with conflicting emotions about her mentor's fate. The evidence of espionage was undeniable, and the violation of patient trust was inexcusable from both medical and ethical perspectives. But understanding the family pressures that had initially motivated Dr. Vasquez's cooperation complicated Maya's feelings of anger and betrayal. More immediately concerning was the impact on the international students who had been subjects of surveillance. Ahmed Hassan, the Egyptian graduate student whose computer science research had attracted federal attention, was facing visa revocation and possible deportation despite being cleared of any security violations. His network security research, while legitimate, involved technologies with potential military applications that made his continued presence in the United States politically complicated. Fatima al-Zahra, the Saudi undergraduate who had experienced the allergic reaction, discovered that her family's business connections had made her a person of interest to multiple intelligence agencies. Though she had no personal involvement in any suspicious activities, Her academic progress was being monitored by both American security services and Saudi officials. Concerned about her exposure to Western influence, Viktor Petrov, Lin Wei, Carlos Mendez, and a dozen other students found themselves caught between their educational aspirations and geopolitical tensions they had never understood or contributed to. Some were facing increased surveillance that made normal college life impossible. Others were being pressured by their home governments to provide information about American research programs. Several had decided to abandon their studies rather than navigate the complex web of competing national interests. Maya had requested permission to meet individually with each affected student, offering apologies for her unwitting role in their surveillance and providing support for Peru, dealing with the ongoing consequences. These conversations had been some of the most difficult of her life, requiring her to balance honesty about what had happened with respect for their privacy and dignity. "I trusted you," Ahmed had said during their meeting in the campus counseling center. "When I told you about my research, about my family pressures, about my fears, I thought you were just helping me communicate with my doctor. Now I discover that everything I said was being analyzed for security implications." Maya had spent 2 hours with Ahmed, listening to his anger and disappointment while trying to explain her own shock at discovering how her work had been exploited. "I know my apology doesn't fix the damage that's been done to your privacy and your future," she had told him. "But I want you to know that every moment I spent helping you was genuine. I cared about your headaches, your stress, your homesickness. Nothing about those feelings was false, even though the larger context was something I never understood." Similar conversations with other affected students had taught Maya important lessons about the complexity of trust, the unintended consequences of good intentions, and the ways that individual relationships could become entangled in larger political and security concerns. But the experience had also deepened her commitment to medical ethics and patient advocacy. She had spent hours researching the legal and professional frameworks that were supposed to protect patient confidentiality, discovering that medical professionals had specific obligations to safeguard sensitive information even when pressured by law enforcement or intelligence agencies. Maya's academic work had continued throughout the investigation, though her relationship with her studies had changed. She still attended organic chemistry lectures and physics labs, still maintained her 3.9 GPA, still prepared for her spring CAT exam. But she had also enrolled in additional courses in medical ethics, international health policy, and legal frameworks for healthcare practice. Professor Martinez in organic chemistry had noticed the change in Maya's engagement with the material. "You're asking different questions this semester," he had observed during office hours. "Less about memorizing reactions and more about understanding how chemical knowledge gets applied in complex social contexts," Maya had explained. As much as confidentiality agreements allowed, that she had experienced situations where medical knowledge intersected with broader social and political concerns. "I'm realizing that being a doctor isn't just about understanding science," she had told Professor Martinez. "It's about navigating ethical complexities when medicine gets involved with law enforcement, immigration policy, and national security." Professor Martinez had recommended Maya for a special independent study program focused on international medical ethics, working with faculty members from the medical school, law school, and international relations program. The interdisciplinary approach appealed to Maya's growing understanding that her future medical career would require expertise that extended beyond traditional clinical training. Her work at the campus health center had resumed, but under new protocols designed to protect both international students and staff members from potential security complications. Maya now worked with a faculty supervisor who had been briefed on the Vasquez case, and all interactions with international students were documented according to strict confidentiality standards that limited access to medical information. The new position had allowed Maya to work more directly with students who were dealing with the ongoing consequences of the espionage investigation. She helped coordinate mental health services for students facing visa complications, provided translation services for interactions with immigration attorneys, and assisted with medical documentation that might support applications for protected status. This work had introduced Maya to immigration law, asylum procedures, and the complex bureaucratic systems that determined international students' ability to remain in the United States. She discovered that medical documentation could be crucial for students seeking protection from political persecution, family threats, or economic coercion in their home countries. Carmen Rodriguez, an attorney specializing in immigration cases, had begun consulting with Maya about the medical aspects of asylum applications. Your understanding of both medical procedures and cultural translation makes you valuable for students who need to document health-related persecution or who have medical conditions that would be dangerous to treat in their home countries, Carmen had explained. The collaboration with immigration attorneys had opened Maya's eyes to another potential career path: medical practice, focused on serving immigrant communities, particularly those dealing with trauma, persecution, and the health consequences of displacement. It was work that combined clinical medicine with social justice advocacy, requiring both medical expertise and understanding of complex legal and cultural factors. Maya's parents had been supportive throughout the federal investigation, though they struggled to understand how their daughter's volunteer work had become entangled in espionage charges. Her father had worried about the potential impact on Maya's future opportunities, while her mother had focused on ensuring that Maya received proper support for dealing with the emotional stress of the situation. Apple, her mother had said during one of their evening phone calls, "Sometimes when we try to help others, we discover that the world is more complicated than we expected. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to help. It means we learn to help more wisely." The wisdom in her mother's words had become a guiding principle for Maya as she navigated the aftermath of the Vasquez case. She had maintained her commitment to serving vulnerable populations while developing better understanding of the ethical and legal frameworks that should govern such work. Maya's relationship with Harold, the library security guard, had deepened during the weeks following her federal questioning. Harold had kept his promise to check on table 847 every night, ensuring that Maya's usual study space remained available when she was ready to return. "I saved your place," Harold had told her when she finally returned to the library 3 weeks after the Skylight incident. "Figured you'd be back eventually, once you got everything sorted out." Maya had resumed her evening study routine, but with new awareness of how individual actions could have unintended consequences in complex social and political systems. Her textbook still focused on cellular biology and organic chemistry, but she now approached the material with questions about how medical knowledge could be protected from exploitation and misuse. The damaged skylight had been repaired, but Maya could still identify the location where the Marines had descended into her formerly peaceful academic sanctuary. The experience had taught her that safety and security were more fragile than she had previously understood, but also that individuals could maintain their integrity even when larger systems failed. Dr. Vasquez's espionage trial was scheduled for the following spring, and Maya would be required to testify about her role in collecting information that had been transmitted to foreign intelligence services. The prospect of testifying against her former mentor remained emotionally difficult, but Maya understood that accountability was necessary for protecting future patients and medical professionals. The university had implemented new security protocols for international student health services, including training for staff members about recognizing potential intelligence, gathering activities, and procedures for reporting suspicious requests for student information. Maya had been asked to help develop the training materials, drawing on her experience to educate others about how legitimate medical work could be exploited for illegitimate purposes. As Maya prepared for her spring semester and final MCAT preparations, she carried with her a deeper understanding of the responsibilities that would come with a medical career. Her experience with the Vasquez case had taught her that doctors must protect not only their patients' physical health, but also their privacy, dignity, and vulnerability from those who might exploit medical relationships for other purposes. The international students who had been affected by the surveillance operation were pursuing various paths forward. Some had transferred to other universities where their academic work could continue without security complications. Others had returned to their home countries, abandoning educational dreams rather than navigating ongoing scrutiny. A few had decided to remain and fight for their right to complete their studies while challenging the assumptions that had made them subjects of suspicion. Maya had committed to maintaining contact with as many of these students as possible, providing ongoing support and advocacy as they dealt with the long-term consequences of becoming unwitting subjects in an espionage investigation. This network of relationships had become another aspect of her preparation for a medical career focused on serving immigrant and international communities. Her medical school applications, which she would submit in 6 months, would include essays about medical ethics, patient advocacy, and the physician's responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from exploitation. The Vasquez case had provided Maya with experiences and insights that would distinguish her application from other pre-med students, though she hoped future medical professionals would not have to learn such lessons through personal involvement in federal investigations. As Maya settled back into her evening study routine at table 847, surrounded by textbooks and the familiar comfort of her mother's thermos filled with jasmine tea, she reflected on how much had changed since that October night when Marines descended through the library skylight. Her academic goals remained the same, but her understanding of what it meant to be a healer had expanded to include responsibilities she had never previously considered. The library around her hummed with the same gentle sounds that had provided comfort during 3 years of undergraduate study, but Maya now understood that the peace she had found in this sanctuary was protected by laws, institutions, and individual choices that could not be taken for granted. Her future medical career would require not only clinical expertise, but also ethical vigilance and the courage to protect patients, even when powerful institutions demanded compliance with questionable requests. 6 months later, Maya Chen's MCAT scores arrived on a cold March morning, delivered to her apartment while she was preparing for another day of classes and volunteer work. The envelope felt impossibly light to contain information that would determine whether 4 years of undergraduate preparation had been sufficient to earn admission to medical school. She opened the results. Sitting at her kitchen table, the same space where she had studied for countless exams and written dozens of application essays. The scores were strong, not perfect, but well above the threshold for competitive medical school admission. More importantly, they represented her ability to focus on academic preparation despite the emotional and logistical complications of serving as a federal witness in an ongoing espionage trial. Dr. Vasquez's trial had concluded 2 weeks earlier with guilty verdicts on all counts. Maya's testimony had been crucial in establishing the systematic nature of the intelligence collection operation and the ways that legitimate medical work had been exploited for espionage purposes. The judge had sentenced Dr. Vasquez to 8 years in federal prison, followed by deportation to Colombia, a sentence that balanced the serious nature of her crimes against the coercive circumstances that had initially motivated her cooperation with foreign intelligence services. Maya had mixed feelings about the verdict. Justice required accountability for violating patient trust and endangering vulnerable students, but she understood that Dr. Vasquez had been trapped between family threats and professional obligations in ways that complicated simple moral judgments. The experience had taught Maya that ethical decision-making in medicine would often involve navigating competing obligations and imperfect choices. Medical school applications had been submitted in January, each one accompanied by personal statements that drew heavily on her experiences with the international student surveillance case. Maya had written about the physician's responsibility to protect patient confidentiality even under pressure from law enforcement, the importance of cultural competency in serving vulnerable populations, and the ways that medical professionals could advocate for patients caught in complex legal and political situations. The responses from medical schools had been overwhelmingly positive. Admissions committees were impressed by Maya's combination of strong academic performance, meaningful volunteer experience, and demonstrated commitment to medical ethics under challenging circumstances. Several schools had specifically noted that her experience with the federal investigation provided unique insights into the intersection of medicine, law, and social justice that would enhance their entering class. By early April, Maya had received acceptance letters from 6 medical schools, including her top choice, a program with strong emphases on community health, international medicine, and serving underserved populations. The school's commitment to training physicians who would work with immigrant communities aligned perfectly with Maya's evolving career goals. Ahmed Hassan had been granted permission to remain in the United States to complete his graduate studies, though his research had been redirected toward less sensitive applications of network security technology. He had become an advocate for international students facing security scrutiny, working with university administrators to develop policies that protected both legitimate security interests and academic freedom. "You helped me understand that being questioned doesn't make you guilty," Ahmed had told Maya during a chance encounter at the campus library. "And you showed me that standing up for what's right sometimes requires accepting uncomfortable scrutiny of your own actions." Fatima Al-Zahra had decided to change her major from pre-med to international relations, motivated by her experience with the intersection of healthcare and national security policy. She planned to work in diplomatic health initiatives, helping develop international frameworks for protecting medical information and ensuring that healthcare services couldn't be exploited for intelligence gathering. "I realized that my experience being caught between medical care and political suspicion happens to people all over the world," Fatima had explained to Maya. "I want to work on policies that prevent other patients from having their healthcare compromised by security concerns." Victor Petrov had transferred to a university in Canada, where his materials science research could continue without the complications of ongoing federal monitoring. But he had maintained contact with Maya, sharing his perspective on how international students could better protect themselves from unwitting involvement in intelligence operations. "The problem isn't individual malice," Victor had written in an email to Maya. "The problem is systems that put individual relationships in conflict with national security concerns, without clear ethical guidelines for resolving those conflicts." 2 years later, Maya Chen was halfway through her second year of medical school when she received an unexpected phone call from Carmen Rodriguez, the immigration attorney she had worked with during the aftermath of the Vasquez case. Carmen was calling to invite Maya to participate in a new initiative, a legal clinic that provided medical documentation and expert testimony for asylum seekers whose cases involved health-related persecution or torture. "We need medical students and professionals who understand both clinical assessment and the cultural factors that affect how patients describe trauma and persecution," Carmen explained. "Your experience with the international student surveillance case gives you unique insights into how medical information can be misused, which makes you particularly valuable for protecting asylum seekers from similar exploitation." Maya was intrigued by the opportunity to apply her medical training to immigration law while advocating for vulnerable populations. The work would involve conducting medical examinations to document evidence of torture or persecution, providing expert testimony about the health consequences of trauma, and ensuring that asylum seekers' medical information was protected from potential misuse by immigration enforcement agencies. She began volunteering at the asylum clinic during her clinical rotations, working with refugees from Central America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia who needed medical documentation to support their legal claims for protection. The work required her to develop expertise in recognizing signs of torture, understanding how cultural factors affected the expression of trauma, and communicating complex medical information in legal proceedings. One of her first cases involved Elena Martinez, a physician from Honduras whose work treating victims of gang violence had made her a target for death threats. Elena needed medical documentation of the psychological trauma she had experienced, as well as expert testimony about the dangers she would face if deported back to Honduras. "I became a doctor to heal people," Elena had told Maya during their initial consultation. "But in my country, healing the wrong people can get you killed. I need someone who understands both medicine and the political complexities that can make medical work dangerous." Maya's assessment of Elena's case required her to document evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, while also researching the specific threats facing healthcare workers in Honduras. The case combined clinical medicine with international human rights advocacy, exactly the kind of work Maya had envisioned when she first decided to pursue medicine. The asylum clinic work also connected Maya with a network of physicians, lawyers, and human rights advocates who were working to protect healthcare workers facing persecution around the world. She learned about doctors in Syria who had been targeted for treating opposition activists, physicians in Myanmar who had been imprisoned for providing care during political protests, and healthcare workers in various countries who faced violence for serving marginalized communities. This global perspective on medical ethics reinforced Maya's understanding that physicians had responsibilities that extended beyond individual patient care to include advocacy for the systems and policies that made healing possible. She began to see her future career not just as clinical practice, but as part of a broader effort to protect the integrity of medical relationships from political and security pressures. 3 years later, Dr. Maya Chen, she had earned the right to use the title after passing her medical board exams, was completing her residency in family medicine at a community health center that served predominantly immigrant populations. Her clinical training focused on primary care, but she had also developed specialized expertise in trauma-informed care, medical interpretation, and the health needs of refugees and asylum seekers. Her residency research project examined the long-term health consequences of surveillance and security scrutiny on international students and immigrants. The study documented elevated rates of anxiety, depression, and stress-related physical symptoms among individuals who had been subjects of federal investigations, even when those investigations concluded without criminal charges. "We found that the process of being investigated can be as traumatic as any actual wrongdoing," Maya had presented to a national conference on immigrant health. "Medical professionals need to understand that patients who have been subjects of security scrutiny may experience ongoing health effects that require specialized treatment approaches." The research had attracted attention from physicians working with immigrant communities across the country, leading to invitations for Maya to consult on cases involving patients who had experienced similar surveillance or investigation. Her expertise in the intersection of medicine and national security policy was becoming recognized as valuable for understanding a specific category of health concerns affecting immigrant populations. Maya's work had also caught the attention of federal agencies seeking to improve their procedures for interacting with healthcare systems. She had been invited to participate in developing training programs for federal agents about medical confidentiality, cultural sensitivity, and the ethical frameworks that govern healthcare relationships. The goal is to help federal agents understand that medical relationships are built on trust, and that trust can be damaged even when investigations are conducted legally and professionally. Maya had explained to a group of FBI and immigration enforcement officials, protecting national security and protecting patient health aren't necessarily conflicting goals. But achieving both requires careful attention to ethical boundaries. Harold Winters had retired from his library security position but maintained contact with Maya, following her career progress with grandfatherly pride. He had attended her medical school graduation, sitting with Maya's parents and sharing stories about the dedicated student who had spent 3 years studying at table 847. "I always knew you'd become a doctor," Harold had told Maya at the graduation reception. "But I never imagined you'd become the kind of doctor who teaches federal agents about ethics." That night when the Marines came through the Skylight, "I was worried about protecting one student. Now you're working to protect vulnerable people all across the country." 5 years later, Dr. Maya Chen opened the doors of the International Medical Advocacy Center, a clinic she had founded to serve refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants facing health challenges complicated by legal and political factors. The center combined primary medical care with specialized services including trauma treatment, medical documentation for immigration cases, and advocacy for policies that protected patient confidentiality and healthcare access. The clinic staff included physicians from various countries who had themselves experienced the challenges of practicing medicine across cultural and political boundaries. Dr. Ahmed Hassan had completed his computer science degree and developed secure communication systems that protected patient information from potential surveillance. Dr. Fatima Al-Zahra had finished her international relations studies and worked as the clinic's policy advocate, developing guidelines for protecting healthcare relationships from intelligence gathering. Maya's parents had attended the clinic's opening ceremony, proud that their daughter's medical career had evolved to address the same kinds of challenges they had faced as immigrants, navigating American institutions. Maya's father had provided catering for the event, creating a fusion menu that represented the diverse communities the clinic would serve. "When we came to this country, we hoped you would have opportunities we never had," Maya's mother had said during the ceremony. "But we never imagined you would create opportunities for other people who face the same struggles we experienced." The clinic's patient population included individuals from every continent, representing the global scope of political persecution, economic displacement, and social upheaval that created health challenges requiring specialized understanding. Maya had treated former physicians who needed documentation of torture to support asylum claims, student activists whose mental health had been affected by surveillance in their home countries, and families whose children suffered health consequences from the stress of immigration enforcement. Each case required Maya to apply not only her clinical training but also the lessons she had learned from her own experience with the intersection of healthcare and national security policy. She understood how institutional pressures could compromise medical relationships, how cultural factors affected the expression of trauma, and how advocacy could be necessary to protect individual patients from systemic problems. 8 years later, the Maya Chen International Medical Ethics Institute had become a nationally recognized center for research, training, and advocacy focused on protecting healthcare relationships from political interference. Based at the university where Maya had begun her journey as a pre-med student, the institute trained physicians, lawyers, policymakers, and human rights advocates in the ethical frameworks necessary for navigating medical practice in politically complex environments. Maya's work had taken her around the world, consulting with healthcare systems in countries facing political upheaval, training medical professionals in conflict zones about protecting patient confidentiality, and developing international standards for preventing the exploitation of medical relationships for intelligence gathering. The Institute's research had documented how surveillance and security pressures affected healthcare access and quality in communities around the world. Maya's team had published studies showing that immigrant communities avoided necessary medical care when they feared that seeking treatment could lead to immigration enforcement, that international students suffered health consequences from security scrutiny, and that physicians in politically sensitive situations required specialized support to maintain ethical standards. Healthcare is a human right that shouldn't be compromised by political fears. Maya had testified before Congress during hearings on immigration policy and public health. When people are afraid to seek medical care because of potential security consequences, everyone's health is endangered. The testimony had led to policy changes that provided stronger protections for medical confidentiality in immigration enforcement contexts, created clearer guidelines for federal agents interacting with healthcare systems, and established funding for clinics serving politically vulnerable populations. Maya's personal life had evolved alongside her professional mission. She had married Dr. James Liu, a physician specializing in refugee health, whom she had met during her residency training. Their 2 children, Elena and David, were growing up bilingual and bicultural, learning from their parents. Example about using professional skills to serve communities facing challenges and discrimination. The family lived near the university campus, and Maya often walked past Whitmore Memorial Library during evening strolls with her children. The library's skylight had been fully restored, but Maya still remembered the night when Marines descended through the glass, changing the trajectory of her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Table 847 was still there, still positioned between the philosophy and natural sciences sections, still lit by the same reading lamp that had illuminated thousands of hours of study. Sometimes Maya would sit there while her children explored the library's children's section, using the space to review research papers or prepare lectures for the medical ethics courses she taught. Harold Winters, now in his 70s, occasionally visited the library and would find Maya at her old study table. Their conversations had evolved from security guard and student to colleagues, united by their commitment to protecting vulnerable people within institutional systems. Harold had reflected during one of these conversations. That night when the Marines came through the skylight was terrifying at the time. But looking at everything you've accomplished since then, maybe it was necessary to shake up your comfortable routine and show you that there was more important work to do than just studying for tests. Maya had considered Harold's perspective many times over the years. The federal investigation had disrupted her carefully planned path to medical school, but it had also introduced her to ethical complexities and social justice concerns that had shaped her entire career. Without that jarring introduction to the intersection of medicine and national security policy, she might never have developed the expertise and passion that defined her professional mission. 10 years later, Dr. Maya Chen stood before an audience of medical students, residents, and practicing physicians at the annual International Conference on Medical Ethics and Human Rights. Her keynote address was titled, "Protecting Healing: Relationships in an Age of Security Concerns," drawing on 2 decades of experience that had begun with her unwitting involvement in a federal espionage investigation. Medical professionals have always faced ethical challenges, Maya began, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of navigating complex situations where individual patient care intersected with broader social and political concerns. But in our current era of global migration, international terrorism concerns, and technological surveillance capabilities, we face unprecedented pressures that threaten the fundamental trust upon which healing relationships depend. The audience included physicians from dozens of countries, representing healthcare systems operating under various political constraints and security pressures. Maya's presentation drew on case studies from her own practice, research from the International Medical Ethics Institute, and policy recommendations developed through years of advocacy work. The young woman who was studying cellular biology in a quiet library never imagined that her volunteer translation work would become entangled in international espionage, Maya continued, referring to her own experience without claiming credit for the personal transformation that had resulted. But that experience taught essential lessons about how individual relationships of trust and care can be exploited by larger systems unless we actively work to protect them. Maya's presentation included specific recommendations for medical professionals, working with vulnerable populations, protocols for protecting patient information from potential surveillance, training for recognizing when patients might be subjects of security scrutiny, and advocacy strategies for challenging policies that compromise healthcare access for politically marginalized communities. The conference audience included Dr. Ahmed Hassan, now a cybersecurity expert who had developed encrypted communication systems for healthcare providers in conflict zones, and Dr. Fatima Al-Zahra, who worked for the United Nations developing international standards for protecting medical neutrality in political conflicts. After Maya's presentation, the three former university students gathered for coffee, reflecting on how their shared experience with federal surveillance had shaped their respective career paths toward protecting vulnerable people from institutional exploitation. None of us chose to become experts in medical ethics and security policy, Ahmed observed. But once we understood how easily individual relationships could be compromised by institutional pressures, we couldn't ignore the responsibility to work on protecting others from similar experiences. Fatima nodded in agreement. The investigation was traumatic at the time, but it gave us insights that most people never have to develop. We understand both the legitimate needs for security and the ways that security concerns can be used to justify violations of basic ethical principles. Maya reflected on the long journey from that October night when Marines descended through the library Skylight to this international conference, where she was recognized as an expert in protecting healthcare relationships from political interference. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just been studying in my dorm room that night instead of the library. Would I have become a conventional family physician without ever understanding these broader ethical responsibilities? The universe has a way of putting people where they need to be, Fatima suggested. You were in that library because you were the kind of person who would spend every evening studying to help others through medicine. The same dedication that made you a good pre-med student made you someone who could transform a traumatic experience into a career dedicated to protecting others. 15 years later, the Maya Chen Center for Medical Ethics and Immigrant Health had become an international model for integrating clinical care, policy advocacy, and research focused on protecting vulnerable populations. Located on the university campus where Maya had begun her educational journey, the center served as both a treatment facility and a training ground for healthcare professionals committed to social justice and ethical practice. Maya's children, Elena and David, were now teenagers who had grown up understanding that their mother's work involved protecting people who faced discrimination and persecution. They had volunteered at the center's community outreach programs, helping with translation services and cultural orientation for new refugee families. Elena, now 16, had decided to study international law with the goal of developing legal frameworks that would protect healthcare workers from political persecution. David, 14, was interested in biomedical engineering and hoped to develop technologies that could protect patient information from surveillance while enabling necessary medical communication. Both children understood that their family's comfortable, middle-class life was built on their parents' commitment to serving others, particularly those who lacked the social and economic resources to protect themselves from institutional exploitation. Maya's parents, now in their 70s, had remained active in supporting their daughter's work while maintaining the family restaurant that had provided economic stability during Maya's educational journey. Chen's Garden had become a gathering place for the immigrant community, offering not only familiar foods but also informal support networks and cultural connection for families adapting to American life. Her mother's thermos, the same silver container decorated with fading cherry blossoms that had accompanied Maya through countless nights of study, now sat on Maya's office desk at the medical center. She still used it for jasmine tea during long days of patient care, research, and policy development, maintaining the ritual that connected her current work to the dreams and sacrifices that had made her career possible. Harold Winters, now in his 80s, had become an honorary board member of the Maya Chen Center, sharing his perspective as someone who had witnessed the beginning of Maya's journey from dedicated student to internationally recognized advocate for medical ethics and immigrant health. I keep thinking about that night in the library, Harold had reflected during the center's 10th anniversary celebration. At the time, it seemed like a violation of everything the library represented, a place of learning and peace, disrupted by military action and federal investigations. But looking at what grew out of that experience, maybe it was exactly what needed to happen to awaken someone who had the capability and dedication to address problems most of us never even recognize. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Maya's former mentor who had served 8 years in federal prison for espionage, had been deported to Colombia upon completion of her sentence. Through intermediaries, she had sent Maya a letter expressing regret for exploiting their professional relationship and pride in Maya's subsequent career, devoted to protecting the ethical principles that Vasquez had violated. I hope that the damage I caused to your trust and to our patients' privacy has been transformed into something valuable for protecting others, Vasquez had written. Your work gives meaning to the suffering that resulted from my choices, and I am grateful that someone with your integrity was able to build something positive from such a difficult experience. Maya had never responded to the letter directly, but she had incorporated lessons learned from the Vasquez case into her research and advocacy work. Understanding how good people could make destructive choices under pressure had informed her approach to developing systems and policies that would support ethical behavior even in challenging circumstances. 20 years later, Dr. Maya Chen's memoir, Healing Under Surveillance, A Physician's Journey from Investigation to Advocacy, had become required reading in medical ethics courses at universities across the country. The book detailed her transformation from unwitting intelligence asset to internationally recognized expert in protecting healthcare relationships from political interference. The memoir's final chapter, titled The Skylight Moment, reflected on how individual lives could be changed by unexpected encounters with larger social and political forces, and how those encounters could become catalysts for careers dedicated to protecting others from similar experiences. Every physician faces moments when individual patient care intersects with broader social justice concerns, Maya had written. My skylight moment came early and dramatically, but every healthcare professional will eventually confront situations where protecting patients requires challenging institutional pressures, advocating for policy changes, or accepting personal risks to maintain ethical standards. Book had inspired a new generation of medical students to consider the broader social context of healthcare practice and the physician's responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from systemic exploitation and discrimination. Maya's work had contributed to significant policy changes at both national and international levels. The Chen protocols for protecting medical confidentiality had been adopted by healthcare systems in 37 countries, providing specific guidelines for maintaining patient privacy even when governments requested medical information for security purposes. The international standards for medical neutrality, developed through Maya's research and advocacy, had been incorporated into United Nations human rights frameworks and used to protect healthcare workers in conflict zones around the world. But perhaps Maya's most important legacy was the network of physicians, lawyers, policymakers, and human rights advocates who had been trained through her programs and inspired by her example to integrate clinical practice with social justice advocacy. Hundreds of healthcare professionals around the world were applying lessons learned from Maya's experience to protect vulnerable populations in their own communities and countries. As Maya approached her 60th birthday, she often reflected on the trajectory that had taken her from a pre-med student focused on cellular biology to an internationally recognized expert in medical ethics and human rights. The journey had been challenging, sometimes painful, but ultimately deeply fulfilling, in ways she could never have anticipated. During those quiet nights of study at table 847, the library where her transformation had begun remained a place of learning and reflection. Though the student population had changed and new technologies had altered the research process, Maya occasionally visited during evening walks, sometimes finding students occupying her old study table, pursuing their own dreams of healing and service. She would watch these young people preparing for careers they hoped would allow them to help others, understanding that some of them would face their own Skylight moments, unexpected encounters with ethical complexities that would challenge their assumptions and redirect their professional paths toward broader service and advocacy. Maya's greatest hope was that the policies, training programs, and institutional changes that had resulted from her experience would protect future healthcare professionals and their patients from the kind of exploitation and surveillance that had characterized the Vasquez case. But she also understood that each generation would face new challenges requiring continued vigilance, advocacy, and commitment to the ethical principles that made healing relationships possible. The Skylight at Whitmore Memorial Library had been reinforced with stronger glass and better security systems. But Maya knew that true security for vulnerable people required more than architectural improvements. It required healthcare professionals who understood their broader social responsibilities, policies that protected medical relationships from political interference, and communities committed to supporting those who served marginalized and persecuted populations. As Maya continued her evening walk past the library toward her family home, she carried with her the satisfaction of a career that had transformed personal trauma into protection for countless others. The young woman who had been studying cellular biology that October night could never have imagined the international impact that would grow from her unwitting involvement in a federal investigation, but she would have recognized the underlying motivation that had driven Maya's life work: the commitment to healing others and protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit their trust. The story that had begun with Marines descending through a library skylight had become a testament to the power of individual transformation, the importance of ethical courage, and the possibility that even the most disruptive experiences could be channeled toward meaningful service to others. On quiet evenings like this one, Maya could still taste the jasmine tea from her mother's thermos, still feel the weight of textbooks in her backpack, still remember the gentle hum of the old radiator that had provided comfort during hundreds of hours of study. Those memories anchored her to the dreams and dedication that had sustained her through 2 decades of challenging but deeply meaningful work. The Skylight moment had ended Maya's comfortable routine as a pre-med student, but it had begun her journey toward becoming the physician, advocate, and teacher she was meant to be. In transforming her own experience of surveillance and investigation into a career devoted to protecting others from similar exploitation, Maya had found a way to honor both the trust that patients placed in healthcare professionals and the responsibility that physicians carried to serve not just individual patients, but the broader cause of justice and healing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients whose health needs intersected with complex social and political circumstances, new opportunities to advocate for policies that protected vulnerable populations, and new chances to train the next generation of healthcare professionals in the ethical frameworks necessary for practicing medicine in an increasingly complex world. But tonight, as Maya reached her front door and prepared to join her family for dinner, she carried with her the deep satisfaction of knowing that her life's work had grown from a commitment to healing that had begun long before that October night in the library and would continue long after she retired from active practice. The young woman who had been studying cellular biology had become a physician who understood that the most important healing work often took place not in examination rooms but in the broader systems and policies that determined whether vulnerable people could Access care without fear. The story of Maya Chen would be remembered not for the night when Marines descended through a library skylight, but for the 20 years of dedicated service that had transformed that traumatic experience into protection, healing, and hope for countless others who needed someone to understand their vulnerability and fight for their right to receive care with dignity and safety. 20-5 years later, the Maya Chen International Institute for Medical Ethics had become a permanent fixture at the United Nations, providing consultation on healthcare policies in conflict zones and developing international standards for protecting medical personnel and patients from political persecution. Dr. Maya Chen, now in her mid-60s, served as the Institute's director emeritus while maintaining an active clinical practice focused on refugees and asylum seekers. Influence extended far beyond individual patient care or even policy development. A generation of physicians, lawyers, and human rights advocates had been trained through her programs, creating a global network of professionals who understood the intersection of healthcare and social justice. These individuals served in hospitals, refugee camps, international aid organizations, and government agencies around the world, applying lessons learned from Maya's experience to protect vulnerable populations in their own contexts. The annual Maya Chen Lecture on Medical Ethics and Human Rights had become one of the most prestigious presentations in international health policy, drawing speakers and audiences from every continent. This year's lecture was being delivered by Dr. Elena Shen Liu, Maya's daughter, who had followed her mother's path into medicine while specializing in the mental health needs of torture survivors and political refugees. My mother's story began with a young woman studying cellular biology. In a quiet library, Elena began addressing an audience of several hundred medical professionals, policymakers, and human rights advocates. She was focused on understanding how individual cells divided and multiplied, how life renewed itself through orderly biological processes. She had no way of knowing that her own life was about to be divided into before and after by an encounter with forces she couldn't control or understand. Elena's presentation traced the evolution of international standards for medical neutrality and patient protection that had grown from Maya's experience and advocacy. The Chen protocols were now standard practice in healthcare systems across 6 continents, protecting millions of patients from potential surveillance and exploitation while ensuring that legitimate security concerns could be addressed without violating medical ethics. But the real legacy of that night in the library isn't the policies or protocols that emerged from it, Elena continued. It's the understanding that individual healthcare professionals have responsibilities that extend beyond their immediate patients to include advocacy for the systems and policies that make ethical practice possible. Maya sat in the audience, proud of her daughter's articulation of principles that had guided Maya's own career while recognizing Elena's unique contributions to understanding the intergenerational effects of trauma and persecution on immigrant families. Elena's work had expanded beyond Maya's focus on individual patient protection to address the broader social determinants of health that affected entire communities. Dr. David Chen, Maya's son, had taken a different path while remaining committed to the same underlying values. As a biomedical engineer, he had developed secure communication technologies that protected patient information in healthcare systems operating under authoritarian governments. His innovations had been crucial in providing medical care to dissidents, human rights activists, and political refugees who needed treatment but couldn't risk having their medical information compromised. Both of Maya's children had grown up understanding that professional success meant more than personal achievement. It required using skills and resources to protect those who lacked the power to protect themselves. This understanding had been shaped not only by their parents' example but by their childhood exposure to the refugee families and asylum seekers who had been part of Maya's patient population throughout their upbringing. Maya's parents had lived to see their granddaughter deliver the keynote address at an international conference on medical ethics, fulfilling dreams they had carried across oceans and through decades of hard work. Her father had died peacefully 5 years earlier, proud that his sacrifice of engineering school in Manila had ultimately contributed to his granddaughter's ability to protect vulnerable people around the world. Her mother, now 83, still maintained the family restaurant while supporting the community networks that had sustained immigrant families for 3 decades. Original thermos, now showing its age but still functional, remained on Maya's office desk as a reminder of the dreams and sacrifices that had made her career possible. She still used it for jasmine tea during long days of patient care and policy work, maintaining the ritual that connected her current work to the young woman who had spent hundreds of hours studying at table 847. Harold Winters had died peacefully 2 years earlier at the age of 86, surrounded by family and friends who included Maya and her children. His funeral had been attended by dozens of former students whose lives had been touched by his grandfatherly concern and protective instincts. Maya had spoken at the service, reflecting on Harold's role in protecting her during the most frightening night of her college years and his continued support throughout her career. Transformation. Harold understood that libraries weren't just repositories of books but sanctuaries where people could dream and grow and become who they were meant to be. Maya had said during her eulogy, "When that sanctuary was violated by forces beyond our control, Harold's first instinct was to protect the vulnerable student who had trusted the library's safety. That instinct to protect those who can't protect themselves became a guiding principle for my entire career." Table 847 at Whitmore Memorial Library had been designated as the Maya Chen study table, with a small plaque recognizing the location where a pre-med student's life had been transformed by an encounter with federal investigators. The table continued to be used by students pursuing their own dreams of healing and service, many of whom were unaware of its historical significance, but benefited from the same quiet atmosphere that had supported Maya's academic preparation. The library itself had become a symbol of the resilience of learning environments and the importance of protecting spaces where people could pursue knowledge without fear of surveillance or interference. The Skylight had been replaced with advanced security glass, but the building's essential character as a sanctuary for learning and reflection remained unchanged. Maya's memoir had been translated into 37 languages and was used in medical schools, law schools, and human rights training programs around the world. The book's message that individual encounters with injustice could be transformed into careers devoted to protecting others had inspired thousands of young professionals to consider the broader social implications of their chosen fields. But perhaps Maya's most important contribution was the living example she provided of how personal trauma could be channeled into meaningful service to others. Her transformation from victim of surveillance to advocate for surveillance protection demonstrated that individuals could maintain agency and purpose even when confronted by institutional forces beyond their control. The Chen Institute had documented over 50,000 cases of healthcare professionals and patients who had been protected from political persecution, surveillance, or exploitation through policies and programs developed from Maya's experience. These numbers represented not just statistical achievements, but individual lives. Doctors who could practice medicine without fear of political retaliation, patients who could seek treatment without risking deportation or persecution, and families who could access healthcare services without compromising their safety or legal status. Maya's approach to combining clinical practice with policy advocacy had become a model for physicians working in politically complex environments. Medical schools now offered specialized tracks in social justice medicine that prepared students to navigate the intersection of healthcare and human rights. These programs drew on curriculum materials developed through Maya's research and teaching, ensuring that future physicians would understand their responsibilities to protect vulnerable patients from systemic exploitation. 30 years later, Dr. Maya Chen's 80th birthday celebration was held at Whitmore Memorial Library, in the same reading room where Marines had descended through the Skylight 5 decades earlier. The event brought together colleagues, former patients, policymakers, and family members who had been touched by Maya's work throughout her career. Celebration featured speeches from physicians working in refugee camps in Jordan, lawyers protecting asylum seekers at the U.S.-Mexico border, policymakers developing international standards for medical neutrality, and former students who had been inspired by Maya's example to pursue careers combining clinical practice with social justice advocacy. Dr. Elena Sheng Liu, now director of the Maya Chen Institute, reflected on her mother's legacy during the evening program. The young woman who was studying cellular biology at this table 50 years ago could never have imagined the international impact that would grow from her unwitting involvement in a federal investigation. But she would have recognized the underlying motivation that drove my mother's life work, the commitment to healing others and protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit their trust. Maya herself spoke briefly, focusing not on her accomplishments, but on the lessons learned from a lifetime of work at the intersection of healthcare and human rights. That night when Marines came through the Skylight, I thought my carefully planned life was being destroyed, she reflected. I couldn't have imagined that the disruption would lead to work more meaningful and fulfilling than anything I had originally envisioned. She looked around the library reading room, noting the students who continued to pursue their own dreams at tables throughout the space. Every person in this room tonight has faced moments when individual plans intersected with larger social forces, moments that required choosing between personal comfort and service to others. The measure of our lives isn't whether we avoid those difficult choices, but whether we respond to them with courage, integrity, and commitment to protecting those who need protection. The celebration concluded with Maya returning to table 847, where she opened a biology textbook to the same chapter on cellular mitosis she had been studying 50 years earlier. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on her. She had spent her career understanding how individual actions could multiply and spread to affect countless other lives. Just as cells divided and multiplied to create and sustain living organisms. As the evening ended and guests departed, Maya remained at the table with her family, sharing stories about the journey that had taken her from pre-med student to internationally recognized advocate for medical ethics and human rights. Her grandchildren, now teenagers themselves, listened with the same fascination their parents had shown years earlier when Maya had first explained how a night of studying had become a catalyst for a lifetime of service. "Will you tell us again about the Marines coming through the Skylight?" asked Maya's granddaughter Sarah, who was considering following her grandmother's path into medicine. Maya smiled, understanding that the story had taken on mythical qualities for younger generations who had grown up benefiting from the policies and protections that had emerged from that frightening night. "The important part of the story isn't the Marines or the investigation," Maya explained. "It's what happened afterward, how we chose to respond to circumstances we couldn't control, and how we transformed the traumatic experience into something that could protect others from similar trauma." As Maya gathered her things to leave the library, she looked once more at the Skylight that had been the entry point for the Marines who had changed her life's trajectory. The glass was now reinforced and secure, but Maya understood that true security for vulnerable people required more than architectural improvements. It required healthcare professionals who understood their broader social responsibilities, policies that protected medical relationships from political interference, and communities committed to supporting those who served marginalized and persecuted populations. The young woman who had been studying cellular biology that October night 5 decades earlier could never have imagined the international impact that would grow from her unwitting involvement in a federal investigation. But she would have. recognized the underlying motivation that the young woman who had been studying cellular biology that October night 5 decades earlier could never have imagined the international impact that would grow from her unwitting involvement in a federal investigation. But she would have recognized the underlying motivation that had driven Maya's entire life, the desire to understand how healing worked, how individual actions could multiply to affect countless lives, and how trust between people could create the foundation for something larger than themselves. Maya's final reflection, as she prepared to leave table 847 for what might be the last time as an active professional, centered on the concept that had fascinated her during that interrupted study session so many years ago: cellular mitosis. She had spent her career understanding how individual relationships could divide and multiply, creating networks of trust and protection that sustained entire communities. International students she had helped during her volunteer work had become physicians, teachers, engineers, and advocates in their own right, carrying forward the understanding that healing required not just technical skill, but ethical courage. Ahmed Hassan's secure communication systems protected healthcare workers in authoritarian regimes. Fatima al-Zahra's policy work ensured that medical neutrality standards were respected in international conflicts. Viktor Petrov's materials science research contributed to medical devices that saved lives in resource-limited settings. Each of these individuals had taken the trauma of being surveilled and investigated and transformed it into professional dedication to protecting others from similar experiences. Their work had multiplied across continents and generations, creating a living network of protection for vulnerable people who needed healthcare without fear of political consequences. Maya's own children and grandchildren represented another form of multiplication, the Pozihonje, transmission of values and commitments across generations. Alina's work with torture survivors, David's development of privacy-protecting technologies, and their children's emerging interests in medicine, law, and human rights demonstrated how individual transformation could become family legacy and social change. The Chen Institute's global network of trained professionals represented perhaps the most significant multiplication of Maya's initial experience. Thousands of physicians, lawyers, and advocates had learned to recognize and resist the exploitation of healthcare relationships for political purposes. Each of them carried forward the understanding that medical ethics required active protection, not just passive adherence to professional codes. Maya thought about the metaphor that had unconsciously guided her career: the library as sanctuary. The reading room where she now sat had been designed as a space where knowledge could be pursued safely, where individual minds could grow and develop without external interference. The violation of that sanctuary by military force had taught Maya that safety required active protection, that institutions needed people willing to defend their essential purposes. Her life's work had been an effort to extend that sanctuary concept to healthcare relationships, ensuring that the trust between patients and providers could be protected from political interference, that vulnerable people could seek healing without fear of surveillance or persecution, that medical knowledge could serve human well-being rather than state security interests. The irony that had shaped Maya's understanding was profound. The violation of her personal sanctuary had led to her becoming a protector of sanctuaries for others. The night that had destroyed her comfortable routine as a pre-med student had initiated her transformation into someone who could recognize and resist similar violations affecting vulnerable people around the world. As Maya stood to leave the library, she understood that her story was ending where it had begun, with a young person studying at table 847, preparing for a career in healing. Her granddaughter Sarah sat in Maya's old chair, textbooks spread around her in the same careful organization Maya had used 50 years earlier. The cycle was continuing, but with the protection of knowledge and institutional safeguards that Maya's generation had created. Maya's final words to Sarah encapsulated the wisdom gained from a Lifetime of transforming trauma into service. Remember that the most important healing work often happens not in examination rooms, but in the systems and policies that determine whether people can access care with dignity and safety. Your individual actions will multiply and spread in ways you can't imagine, touching lives in places you may never visit, protecting people you may never meet. The skylight above them reflected the late evening lights of the campus, its reinforced glass a symbol of both vulnerability and resilience. Maya understood that each generation would face new challenges to the sanctuary of learning and healing, new threats to the trust that made human development possible, new opportunities to choose between personal comfort and service to others. Her legacy was not just the policies and institutions she had created, but the understanding that individual encounters with injustice could be transformed into systems of protection for others. The young woman studying cellular biology had become an international advocate for medical ethics, but the essential motivation had remained constant: the desire to understand how life sustained and renewed itself, how individual actions could serve the larger purpose of human flourishing. Maya Chen's story demonstrated that lives could be divided by unexpected encounters with forces beyond individual control, but that the aftermath of such divisions could be directed toward multiplication of protection, healing, and hope for those who most needed sanctuary in an often dangerous world. The library closed around them as Maya and Sarah gathered their books, continuing a conversation that had begun 50 years earlier with Marines descending through a skylight, and would continue as long as people were willing to transform personal challenges into service to others. The young woman studying at table 847 was no longer Maya Chen, but the commitment to healing and protection continued, multiplying across generations like the cellular processes Maya had been studying on that pivotal October night when her comfortable world had shattered and her true calling had begun. Maya's story shows how one night can change everything. Her journey from student to advocate proves that even our most frightening moments can lead to meaningful purpose. What did you think of Maya's incredible transformation? This story required extensive research and careful crafting to bring you this level of detail. If you enjoyed following Maya's journey from that terrifying night in the library to her life-changing career, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating these compelling true stories that inspire and captivate. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.